And my career counselor at the third high school that I was in happened to have gone to UVA. And he said, you know what, you're really good at math. Why don't you apply to the engineering program? And so I knew that, engineers in that career path required, skills in math and science. I liked math and science. And I thought that's a good career trajectory. Why not? So I applied really because of his recommendation, because it sounded good to me. And that is how I ended up in the systems engineering program at UVA. And once I got there, there's a lot of different majors for engineers, but there are a few that you need to apply to. And so systems engineering was actually one of the majors you needed to apply to. So I applied and I ended up being a minority. I was the only Black woman.
Wow.
Of about 75 students in my class of engineering. So that's how I got there. And it was quite a journey. And quite an experience to have that. I had a great experience, by the way, but it was an adjustment for sure.
Had you been in spaces where there was little diversity like that all your life? Was that something that was new to you in terms of especially ethnic demographic diversity like that? Or was that something you were accustomed to?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that growing up, I was in lots of different school systems. I remember growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, and being a part of the majority. Like, it was mostly Black and brown kids, at the school that I went to in Atlanta, Georgia. I think, when I lived in Izmir, Turkey in 4th and 5th grade, there were a lot of military students. We went to an American school and within the community of Izmir, Turkey. So we were surrounded by a lot of people who didn't speak our language. But once we went in that building, it was all military kids. And it was pretty diverse, racially, in terms of our teachers, in terms of the students. I would say, Black was kind of the minority of it, but there were enough other people within my classes. And I would say the same thing when I lived in California. So I've had the privilege of being in, pretty diverse mixed spaces where there are other, peers that were speaking other languages, that even if, white might have been the majority, half of the students were of color in some type of way, even if they weren't Black and had that experience. So being a part of the majority in Atlanta, being in, these very mixed, diverse communities, other language and spaces in the military, and then getting to UVA and being the only Black girl, I felt some imposter syndrome. It was this weird feeling of both being almost like overly visible, like you're having to represent your race every time you say something, but at the same time being 100% invisible, because when people were choosing groups or talking about looking up past tests, they went to their networks. I wasn't a part of any of those networks. I wasn't going to the same parties as my classmates. And so it was this really eerie feeling of feeling very hyper visible, but then also feeling very invisible at the same time.
Yeah. And I could imagine that may have also impacted or the effort that you worked with, or the motivation at working hard as well, right? Because I'm sure it's noticeable when you perform a particular way or don't perform a particular way. Did that impact your performance, you think, in that way? Or am I just sort of
I was definitely, I grew up in the school of you have to be better than your peers to be like you are average. And to be on the map for opportunities. And so I do think that I felt that pressure to excel